So thank you. I think it's very exciting to be presenting and hosted in this instance by the Octopus program, which is very much initiated by Başak and with the University of Applied Arts here in Vienna. This little 20-minute talk, which is accompanied by a film, is a reflection of my experience and the roles that I took in the founding and the creating of a space in downtown Johannesburg called the Center for the Less Good Idea. It's a quick talk, and so I can't name all of the artists involved, and I wanted to just say that from the outset, that everybody involved in all of this footage is available on our website, which is lessgoodidea.com, where the extraordinary now over 400 artists are also reachable via the center. And it's very exciting to be sitting in Vienna and looking at a screen that has many friends and colleagues that I've subsequently met in this past 11 months in Vienna, but also my friends and colleagues from South Africa, and specifically to have Phala Okiditsa Phala, who took over my role after the first 4 years in the center and is currently running it and animateuring it. So Phala, I'm excited to hear how you think about animateuring after this talk. So I'm going to share my screen. Oh, it won't. Can everybody see that?
Yes.
Great.
Yes.
Yes.
Okay. So I'm a visual artist. Site specificity, responsiveness, and performativity are central to my practice. My focus over the past 16 years has been on the collaborative relationships between art and other fields. This includes physics, museum practice, philosophy, literature, and education. In Johannesburg, I have developed a combination of an introspective, process-led studio practice and a gregarious, collaborative, communal practice. On a meta level, my life as an artist has sought to better understand complexity, to embrace nuance, and to build interconnectedness. My fellowship with other fields comes from an understanding that when we meet, react, and respond to one another, we are both ultimately transformed and form part of an intricate net-like fabric of never-ending activity. So it was in early 2016 that I received a call from William Kentridge's studio with a request to meet him for tea. I didn't know what the meeting would be about, and I remember waking up on the day with a combination of curiosity and excitement. Later that week when I met him, he described his plan to create and support a new foundation for the arts in Johannesburg. As a fellow artist and residing in the same district, the Maboneng Cultural Precinct in downtown Johannesburg, he asked me if I was interested in working alongside him and his studio team in initiating this space. The meeting was not very long, but I left it with formative words ringing in my ears. Interdisciplinary, incubating, collaborative, collective, responsive, performative. During the first few months of co-thinking, William shared with me a Tswana proverb that he had collected from the late and great Sol Plaatje's little book, Setswana Proverbs. When translated from Setswana into English, the proverb goes, if the good doctor can't cure you, find the less good doctor. This grammatically clumsy, cumbersome, and amusing phrase somehow describes secondary artistic processes with such precision and resonance that I still thoroughly enjoy waiting and watching for the flicker of light in most artists' eyes when they first hear it. Pursuing the less good idea has become the Center for the Less Good Idea's methodological and philosophical approach. The center currently opens itself up several times a year, and hosts generative multidisciplinary workshops where ideas are tested and translated into physical form. By November 2016, I was in the eye of a magnificent storm of contemporary art production. It was the third day of an intense and massively generative 5-day incubator workshop towards the inaugural season of the Center for the Less Good Idea. Around 80 artists from every discipline were involved in the pursuit of new combinations of text, movement, sounds, and images. As incidental discoveries arose, they were identified, pursued, captured on film, in sound, and written about. The fluidity of process was being captured and reflected back to ourselves and the artists on a daily basis. The space was intuitively giving all of its attention and resources to the impulses, connections, and revelations identified by the artists. It was 4 p.m. of that same day. Perhaps due to exhaustion, low blood sugar combined with exhilaration, I had a sense of being outside of myself, a déjà vu type feeling. Everything slowed down and I looked around the room. I saw a poet and an operatic singer in the boxing ring with professional boxers.
Patriarchy detox program. Conditioning, collective amnesia.
A visual artist furiously throwing clay and molding it to a dancer's body, whilst a cinematographer and a lighting designer argue how to best capture it. An 11-man a cappella choir, a choreographer and 2 contemporary dancers finding form and iteration towards a new sound and movement piece. By this time, we had named my role at the center Animateur. It was a call to animate, to breathe life into a space, to watch over and grow its energy, and then to pull on the threads of networks that existed between artists from across the disciplines far and wide. We chose to use the French version of the word because it also brought to mind the word amateur, not in reference to the more common interpretation as a bungler of things, but rather in reference to the passionate lover and nurturer of something new and in its infancy. The undertaking was to open up a space, to build a bridge, to love the emergent and to midwife its manifestation. We understood that the space we were building did not require a single head, but rather someone responsible for its energy, momentum, and most importantly, for the holding of artists and processes. My own artistic processes have long been captivated by the relationship between art and what exists outside of art. Much of my artwork is focused on the themes of transition, giving birth, illuminating thresholds, and finding physical form for collapse. This practice has deeply informed my role as animateur. Led by an intuition that comes from experience rather than theories of what constitutes best practice in the arts has enabled us to generate a space that by 2020 has become a formidable space for collaborative contemporary artistic production within the South African landscape. As the animateur, I was able to witness and identify strategies of collective making that successfully unsettle how we understand what constitutes work and what constitutes play, what is useful and what is creative. Much of the Centre's collaborative and methodological approaches, and also its visual identity, have been drawn directly out of William's practice. Here I share with you a 10-minute piece which William created as the opening talk in the inauguration of the Centre for the Less Good Idea.
Can everybody hear? Can everybody hear? Can everybody hear? Wait, wait. Good evening. Wait. The acoustics are not good. You can begin.
Funs povo, povo ta u. UTV-TB, funs. Raketa rinseketa, raketa rinseketa, raketa rinseketa, raketa rinseketa, raketa rinseketa, raketa rinseketa, bo, fo, povo, fums po, povoro, raketa rinseketa, povoro ta, fums povoro ta, fums povoro ta, fums povoro ta, pogrif, fums povoro ta, raketa rinseketa, raketa rinseketa, fums povoro ta, raketa rinseketa, raketa rinseketa, fums povoro ta, UTT. VB, raketa rinseketa, raketa rinseketa, raketa rinseketa, raketa rinseketa, ta u, UTTVB, FIMS, raketa rinseketa, raketa rinseketa, raketa rinseketa, raketa rinseketa, UTVTBE, FIMS. Good evening, and thank you all for being here at the first season of the Centre for the Less Good Idea. And I thought this is the right moment to explain to you the logic behind the Centre for the Less Good Idea. Often when working on a project, you start with the good idea. There's the excitement of this good idea. And all the forces are gathered to realize this good idea, to make the drawing, the film, the piece of theater, the concert. And then the work begins in the studio, on a stage. And as the work begins, often the certainty of this good idea starts to waver. Its logic, which was very clear when written down, begins to falter when put on the stage. And what starts to emerge are fragments at the edge, at the periphery. Strange combinations, someone drumming in one corner of the room and a gesture of an actor in another suddenly come together. The way someone is slumped over a chair, their attitude, while waiting to begin the acting. And what holds us in these moments? It is always a recognition, seeing something we understand but we hadn't realized that we already knew. So there are always ideas hovering at the edge, at the periphery, too timid to come into the middle, in the face of the good idea. A hand cautiously raised. If I might make an observation. Hard thinking going on here, says the good idea. The periphery tries to get a single word in. Well, I wonder if I might, just let me finish, says the good idea. And the ideas at the edge roll their eyes and send text messages to each other while the monologue continues. The fine vowels and clear consonants of the good idea. The good idea drags in all the words around it. Poor recruits who are stripped naked sent off to be examined, their lungs listened to, pronounced fit for service, and then placed into platoons of words to make a paragraph, and the paragraph sent out. And if this first paragraph is shot down, there are lots more words that can be brought in again. To be drawn, to be sent out, new thoughts to be found. Take a word.
Speak clearly.
Take a word.
Speak clearly. Enunciate your vowels.
Take a word. Dismember it and see all its associations. And then see all the hidden associations. And the word starts to get a new spring in its step. Now there comes a battle between the first starting idea, which, let it be said, is a good idea, maybe even an excellent idea, a great big light bulb of an idea. The fragment we glimpsed at the edge of the work is just a brief flaring of a match. There's a battle between this big lamp and the trace of the match. But often we have to put out the big lamp, follow the trace of that match. What is a fragment at the periphery comes to the center. The less good idea is invited in. Doubt, not knowing, uncertainty are given a safe space. There is a need to drown out thoughts to let another thinking take place. This is about the pleasure of making.
He would ignore the world burning around him.
For every fact, for every image, something surprising has
This
to
is
arise.
just a way of ignoring the man standing at the street corner.
This is not about averting your eye, but
The
about
cup
taking
calls
images
out,
in.
I am nothing. I should be
Coffee
everything.
pot cannot hear the
Begging bowl, spark
calls
plug,
out, I am
gun.
nothing. I should be
Who
everything.
is laughing then?
All around
You, recycling men pushing their trolleys up the hill from 3 a.m.
of what is on those trolleys.
The poem is extraneous,
Yet
but every day people die for lack
of
of what is found therein.
We need the impulse
Considered
against the
response
rational.
versus the
We need the
impulse.
impossible against
The rational
possible.
versus the impossible.
You have to
Periphery
circle the idea.
finds its center.
Somewhere in the margins, there is the proof of the theorem. We have to find the moment
Somewhere in the
right
margins is the proof of the theorem.
Who could have predicted it?
If only we had time to write it down. It comes
The world is
who
invited
could have
into the
predicted
studio.
it?
The world is taken
It comes
apart,
as such a
discovered,
surprise.
rearranged.
Place wanting and willing against the 17 bullet points.
Every fragment.
Let the song drown out the TED talk.
So,
Defend the life-saving unnecessary.
predictable phrases start to unpredict, to untrick. We try to keep the information becomes the deformation. Words on a foraging trip, hunter gathering for ideas. Words themselves get, words themselves get, words themselves get, words themselves get, words themselves like their associations. An apothecary shop, an old porcelain eye bath, lapis lazuli blue of an eye bath, a bird bath, yellow branch of the hyphen mint, devil tongue, slices of tongue, an envelope with a telegram inside, delivered by a man who writes, we need to take some. We need to see a biography of obsolete technology, biographies of
So, we have been given the opportunity to build a foundation in the same way one would an artwork, through trial and error, piece by piece, allowing that which works to grow and letting go of that which does not. We've become a distinctive generator of creative playfulness and process, and much of our momentum can be attributed to the luxury that we have, which is willfully ignoring the usual economics of profit and loss which dictate the art world. This is due to our primary funding coming from William himself. Another great privilege of the Centre is its lack of rules, particularly the absence of the defined aesthetic language used to describe art in so many contemporary environments. A release from the definitions of discipline seems to allow the space to be propelled by curiosity. This is not to say that the Centre is anti-intellectual, but rather that it encourages the development of multiple literacies through looking and doing. It is a space that celebrates the seriousness of play, the pleasure of making, the productivity of miscommunication, mistranslation, uncertainty, and a space that praises doubt. Through this, we have discovered that thinking through making can give birth to ideas that are unexpected, that expand our vocabulary, and that surprise us. Its organizational pliability has given what is now an extraordinary core team working at the Centre a capacity to ground our roles as the nurturer of living artists and their efforts to reinvent disciplines and shift their worlds. Because we are artists, we understand and recognize the arc of artistic process. The Centre makes it its desire to accept and hold the inevitable first moments of hype and excitement that come when an idea strikes, then to anticipate the common fatigue and depression that come when that idea fails, and finally to facilitate the resolve and commitment to accept what we did not know but knew somewhere inside of ourselves. We have noticed how care tends to give confidence. By positioning and valuing care into collective and collaborative practice, we have seen on personal and institutional levels that the responsibility and challenge for us to be more attentive and supportive of one another is strengthened. Animateuring is a radical role. It is about growing in a constant state of not knowing. This requires a space whose culture is one of empathy, intimacy, and trust. A space which prizes questioning and risk-taking also needs to encourage honesty and self-awareness. Rather than insisting artists are good or right, we ask artists to be present. It seeks to be a safe space for vastly different artists to be together, and its rigor comes not from a critical stripping of one another's ideas, but rather from acknowledging the fragility of ideas and making the work vulnerable by exposing it in its stages of growth. Essentially, we've been able to think about the physical spaces at the Centre as our personal spaces. And these spaces now hold an emotional and creative memory for over 400 artists to date, of which I am just one.
Well,
So that brings me to a conclusion. And I'd I'd really like to now open it up to a free-flowing, responsive conversation and dialogue, reflecting, I think, on perhaps your spaces. And I think one of the very interesting things that Bashak and myself and other people working and teaching within institutions of arts education and arts academies across the world is the ways in which these spaces can really begin to liberate themselves of some of the inherited structures and assumptions that don't serve the students or the faculties that are functioning within them.
Bronwyn, it was amazing. First of all, I want to thank you, and I want to clap. It was amazing. It was really amazing. And yeah, before we start talking, can I ask a little favor from you? Do you mind also talking a little bit more about seasons?
About the seasons, absolutely. So, one of the sort of programmatic solutions that we came to right in the onset of making the Center for the Less Good Idea was to devise 2 seasons a year, and to say we would break a season up into a year up into 6 months each. At the beginning of those 6 months, the center team invites some core lead artists who we've called curators. These are people who we have noticed have an extraordinary trajectory and practice themselves, people who across artistic disciplines have also shown a kind of habit of reaching outside of their disciplines and reaching outside of just their own practice and working in a collective, collaborative way. The center then asks them to be around a table with each other and with ourselves, and to begin to identify the kinds of people that they would like to work with. And so with that, a season grows. Across those 6 months, there are a number of 4 or 5 day workshops that are highly energetic and action-packed, where ideas are tested and where the core team of the center plays a vital role in doing everything from capturing all the extraordinary footage that you have seen today, and of which this is maybe a 2%. The center cinematographer and editor is a man called Noah Cohen, who is basically on the ground and always being that kind of mirror and editing in an extraordinary way, so that very quickly we can look at ourselves. We also have a resident writer who joins us for seasons, who's in fact in the room with us today. That's Dave Mann. So that's someone that, you know, I call him the writer on the wall, because you kind of you forget that Dave's there, but he captures so much of the nuance which gets fed back both from a process perspective, but also to the artists in the conceptualizing of the work and the naming and the giving language to what is being found in other kinds of forms, be it movement or sound or visual. And so after a number of kind of intensive seasons across those 6 months, we enter a final development and rehearsal phase, which lasts about 2 weeks, in which the artists, and it's usually anywhere in between, sort of our minimum has been 30 artists and our maximum 80, 90 artists at one time, generating all kinds of different forms, performativity in all of its possibilities being at the core of these forms, but everything from 360 virtual reality films and augmented reality artworks to sound installations, and then staged performances, other kinds of films, talks and presentations that also really challenge traditional lectures. And that 2 weeks is about a kind of final development and rehearsal. And then we go into a 5-day public festival in which audience is invited into the space. And we're very clear about the fact that a lot of this work is still in process. And I think we've also, as the center, worked hard to help our audiences and grow our audiences in the understanding that watching work in process and seeing work that is being thought through is a great privilege, and that it is in fact enormously exciting. But also helping our artists with how raw and vulnerable that can also be. So that is a kind of a brief description of what the centers, the seasons constitute. That I would say has been our kind of core focus. However, we do have a number of other sorts of programs. We do a monthly once off, which we call For Once. And that's a kind of incubating and testing of new work, which is shown one night of every month, apart from what has taken place in 2020, which is that we've largely not been able to open up the space and done a lot of online programming. We have an In Conversation series where we've leveraged off of people traveling, who happen to be traveling through South Africa, and working with them to sort of open the dialogue up in a more spontaneous and conversational way. And that's been incredible. We've hosted people like Paul Gilroy, Homi K. Baba, Yinka Shanabare, you know, really seminal thinkers and makers in the world right now, and having a kind of a conversation that has been very generative for many of the artists and the people who follow the center.
Okay, thank you, Bronwyn. So as another, if immediate question is not there, I would like to suggest that, would you like to ask a few questions to the ones from the center at the audience now?
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, what I would love to do is also just say that we have, for example, in the room, I hope she's still with us. Jane Taylor, are you still with us?
Oh, wait.
I think she might have had to, oh, she's there, but she's on mute. But we have a couple of sort of core collaborators at the center in the room with us. And Bongile Zulu, for example, is the current curator of season 8, but has been a core participant of many seasons. And as I mentioned, my colleague Phala Okiditsa Phala, who took, I don't want to actually say took over my role, because it's such a specific thing. I think Phala is making his own space and his own, and that's the kind of pliability and malleability of the center. And so I might be putting you a bit on the spot, Phala, but perhaps if you wanted to respond and reflect a little bit as to how this resonates with you and the kind of last year of it being in your hands.
I mean, thank you, Bronwyn, and thank you for that presentation. The idea of the Center for the Less Good Idea, when one gets it, is that we're ever evolving in terms of what the organization itself is that it is a living organization that also acknowledges that it might have been a good idea that the center was established. And what is the less good idea-ness of the center? What does it do? How does it tell us what it wants to be? One of the things that we have seen and observed over the the 3 years, the past 3 years, has been the organic learning that has happened at the center that necessitated a formation of what we call the SOA Academy. And we have had the iteration of the first iteration of the SOA Academy in the season 7 that I curated with William Kentridge.
Ah, there's Bongile. So, Bongi, this is, you were with us, I don't know if you were with us just as I was ending and we were sort of opening up, and I was announcing that you are a curator of the current season and the building of season 8. And Bashak was asking what a kind of shape of a season looks like. And so, I mean, I know this is putting you on the spot, but because you've participated in so many of the center's activities and are now leading a season, are there any kind of words of reflection that you have?
Hello, everybody. Words of reflection. Okay, having participated in seasons, the best word I have at any given point in time is chaos, which is both terrifying and exciting. And the chaos comes from, firstly, the diversity of disciplines and individuals who also in themselves work across multiple disciplines or with a broad like range, a diverse range within themselves. The range of ways of working as well, and they all collide in a space to try and make something somewhat cohesive. So that it's always trying, and you know, it's a testing thing to do. It tests you, and everything that you think you know is not a true story for the most part. And then you go back and try something else, and then it feels comfortable until it doesn't, and then you go back and then try something else. But somehow throughout all of that trying and, you know, circling and moving forward and sideways and turning yourself inside out, trying things you've never tried, trying things you know very well, things emerge, things grow, pieces are born, expression is born in the most unexpected ways. So that's been my experience of participating in a season, is that you never know. And even when the season is happening and you're about to perform or present, or you still don't know, it's something that's always in motion. It's something that's always, it's moving, it's dynamic. It can continue beyond the center, beyond the season, or it can stop, or it can go back, or like it's dynamic, and it's organic, not organic in the you know, the buzzwordy sense, but organic as in alive, as in, you know, it's of itself, of a natural something. And then in terms of where I'm at now with the center and curating, I haven't a clue. It's been such an awkward experience because we started on Zoom. We're trying to transition into space. There've been so many disruptions. So this hacking was somewhat unsurprising as well. That an issue of constantly being disrupted, and you find a groove and then something shifts, and then there's been this stagnation that is interrupted with sudden bursts, or like these sudden sharp shifts, you know. Yeah, you're still, things are a certain way, and then all of a sudden things change. We've moved from level 5 to level 4, and then level 4 to level 3, then level 3 to level you know, effective immediately, to like, you just never know what is happening. And the same thing is happening in ourselves, the same thing is happening in our work. And this season is one we're trying to navigate with all of that happening. So we're just going, and we're just trying to breathe through it. And that is also the provocation, to just keep finding the breath as we move. Or if the breath stops, be with the stopping of the breath, the inability to breathe. Yeah, that's pretty much it that I can think of. Sure thing, Bronwyn.
Yeah, I think, I mean, one of the, you know, right at the beginning of the year, as we became aware of what the realities were for us in reaction to the physical distancing, and that basically the measures that were being put in place and that were very necessary were, like in any arts space, somewhat devastating to what we had created and to the momentum of the artists, and certainly we couldn't do what we had planned. But we were able to change gear and start to translate some of the kind of physical pieces and performances into a series of video films, working with our extraordinary cinematographers and editors who had to kind of go into a gear that I didn't even know was possible. You know, Noah Cohen being the center's head of photography and cinematography, but also working with some of William's own cinematographers and editors to translate that season into what was viewable on a screen, but still try to hold the kind of essence of the piece. And it was in reaction to that experience that we devised a series of online works and a kind of provocation to the artists we work with, and then artists we haven't worked with yet, to send us 1 minute works, which we called the Long Minute, and have shared pretty much from early April until the beginning of November on a nearly daily basis. And that was very interesting. For some reason, I've been muted. We saw an enormous response, and we saw some really, I've picked up now, looking at these sort of 120 odd short form films that were sent to me, some very interesting threads and themes that have arisen from artists across the world. The one is that there's a sort of focus on gesture and the presence, the sort of metaphoric presence of our hands and the way that we communicate with them, and our mouths, and this kind of first border between ourselves and the outside world. And then as an extension of that, of course, our homes that we're kind of either locked into or not, and what's safe public or private space, indoors or outdoors. And of course, the resonance then into the sort of nation states and this crossing of borders and thresholds. The other very interesting thread is the sort of very dark humor and almost Beckettian quality of many of the pieces that were submitted. And the center has long been fascinated with Beckett and performing Beckett. In our first season, we had dedicated a section of the season to a series of Beckett plays that were created. And we've just, the actually only public performance that we've been able to have this year was Waiting for Godot, which happened last week, and which was a fascinating kind of exploration with Jane Taylor, her research and a kind of dramaturgy of the piece, directed by Pala Okiditsa Pala and performed by 4 extraordinary South African performers. And so maybe at this point, for fear of hopefully not being bombarded again, Pala, to reflect on what it was to open to an audience for the first time, and having to use COVID measures, but bringing people into the space again and trying to kind of test that performance and together state in the center.
Hi, I'm glad I'm back. I don't know what had happened. I just, just started freezing out. But the thing is, it was quite a beautiful experience to engage with the text of Waiting for Godot. The experience of opening up to the audiences with that piece was also such a mind-blowing one, in the sense that I was looking at the audiences who had come in. The way that we had treated Waiting for Godot was also in a very, my objective was to try and get, how far can I stretch the waiting? I wanted to test the tolerance of people, in the sense of the waiting, having waited in lockdown for so long, was how does one bring that experience into the theater? And the experience, I sought to bring that experience by bringing uncomfortable chairs, wooden chairs that are very squeaky, that almost like when you're sitting and watching a play, the squeakiness makes you feel like you're doing something wrong, until you are really tired and the squeakiness becomes a protest of, of the waiting. So, and one of the things that I asked is, our sound person to also make sure that, that sound is part of, what we collect as, part of being the audience. So, and I dealt away also with the interval. So there was no interval, in the piece. So the interval was basically a routine, that had built into the play. So the audience sat there for, just over 2 hours, in the waiting. And it was such an interesting thing to experiment with, because I had understood that the audience had been in a waiting, and therefore in the lockdown, if there's a gift to theater around the COVID, has been the length of waiting. And I'm like, perhaps, it's the time to test right now with our audience how they have learned to wait, and test it, to the literal sense. And it was, I had many different kind of feedbacks from people around the waiting. The other, I remember Anika da Costa saying to me that she thought there was going to be, a break. So she held on, and thinking that it's going to end now. And she found herself waiting with the actors for Godot. And she felt it real because, a part of her wanted to go to the loo. And at some point she had forgotten she wanted to go to the loo. And at some point she felt like, she's really, kind of like waiting with Extragon and Didi. And for me, it's like, if one person got that aspect, then that's the feeling that we got. But it's also difficult to deal with having, like, we've got a small space. So we were dealing with numbers of around 35 people per show. And we normally don't do many shows, at the center. So there has been also a little bit of a demand for the show to come back. It is done as set work. So there's been all those kind of experiences that are, shows the challenges of our time at this point in time. But otherwise, it has been a beautiful experience. People have been hungry to come and watch, the theater. So we were full every day, and we had even people wanting to be on the waiting list. So at least in that way, I mean, our second night was quite an experience, because we had a storm, and we don't have a soundproof roof. So I had to stop the performance, midway through to connect, the actors to an amplification so that the audience can hear. But our audience was quite patient with us in that kind of regard, because we have never pretended that, the theater, at the center, we've always wanted to show process, and the challenges that come through, we always show them. So the challenge of sound was there. So we presented it and we shared it with the audience. So our technicians, people were running around as the actors were, were waiting, and once, that was done, we said, go back, pick it, a little earlier, and it went like, so that has been part of the blessing of being at the center, is that, in our small team, we are able to take, decisions quite quick and on the spot, and deal with situations as they arise. We don't have a bureaucratic aspect where of a CEO sitting, at home, or a board, sitting somewhere, you want to take a decision. So with us is that mostly everybody who matters to take the decision are often in the room anyway working. So it's easier to take decisions around those kind of things. So it is beautiful to work in a space like that.
Mm. Thanks, Bella.
Yeah.
Yeah, so I mean, I don't want to keep everyone forever. I think if there are any other sort of questions or comments, I'm happy to carry on, but we can also say good night.
I have a quick comment question. First of all, I just really enjoyed hearing from your perspective, Bronwyn, and everyone else who spoke, so thanks a bunch. And just listening, it sounds so much like the center functions as a collective, and in a way like reaches the struggles that a collective often faces, and also gives participants the safety of working in numbers. Not necessarily knowing what the end goal is going to be, but I wonder if people have been able to, like, if there are any specific projects that were achieved, like using this maybe as larger in numbers safety, if any like really stand out that wouldn't, people maybe wouldn't have had the courage, or I don't know, to do without the center and without this kind of space. I don't know if there's specific projects that come to mind, but I'd be so curious to hear.
Yeah, I mean, I think that absolutely, you know, I think it's very much a loose collective, whilst, you know, there over the last 4 years, we've worked with around 400 artists. There's a kind of a core of artists who are probably in the range of around 30 who have worked more consistently with the center. And so I think on the one hand, the fact that the center has the opportunity to allow artists to test something that might fail has meant that a lot of artists have been able to take a risk with their idea. And one of the questions that we always ask at the beginning when we engage a curator or an artist on a project is, what is that project you've wanted to do that you haven't been able to for whatever reason? And a lot of the time those reasons are very logistical or financial, but sometimes they also have to do with the subject matter and a kind of other platforms for the arts not being willing to associate themselves with a particular subject matter, for example. So the center is really liberated from that because William is squeamish about nothing, and also willing to put production money and artist fees and what it is into testing an idea, because he and we fundamentally believe that when an idea fails dismally, we learn as much from it as if it's a resounding success. The commitment from the center is that it will still attempt to produce the work to the best of its ability, and so, you know, give it the kind of benefit of the doubt that we talk about. And so, you know, one of the examples that I shared a little bit of in the making was, for example, a choreographer who is renowned in South Africa and highly celebrated, Gregory Mangoma, whose work has gone all over the world, was wanting, when we first engaged him, you know, and asked him that question, what is this thing you're wanting to be doing but you haven't done? He said, well, I've been wanting to collaborate with an isiScatamia choir. Now, isiScatamia is a particular kind of music coming out of South Africa, originating in the mining hostels, an a cappella, generally male choir, which literally translates from Zulu into step light, sing low, and came out of a period where Black men were not allowed to gather en masse and practice their music during the apartheid period. And so it's a kind of a form of music that is generated out of that. And he was wanting to work with a choir of men who practice isiScatamia, and to give them something like bolero as composition, and to see what if they weren't using traditional Zulu compositions and they were using something else, what would that mean? And that piece, that question, and inviting the choir in, inviting its director and Klankla Mahlangu to then work very closely with Gregory, meant that, I wouldn't admit anyone knew, Bashak, meant that, because we're getting that again, meant that he tested an idea that today, kind of 4 years later, has become an international full feature piece that's traveling around the world called Scion. And it has the seeds and the resonances of that first 20-minute piece that he created and showed in that season at the center. And certainly the collaborators and his core dancers, Ngolisile Bongwana and Tulani Chauke, were the kind of cast who got pulled in through that, and the music was composed like that. And I think what was astonishing was in the making of the work, you know, the artists and ourselves were standing back and watching it unfold and realizing how much this was about kind of male relationships and intimacies and really challenging kind of ideas of patriarchy in South Africa, which is a very necessary thing that needs to be done, but quite difficult to do in a society that is heavily patriarchal. And so I think that for me is an example of a work that probably wouldn't have come to be and wouldn't be the work that it is right now, you know, which is now disconnected in its own beautiful kind of very viable piece traveling the world without the centers incubating and sort of acknowledgement that it's quite expensive to bring a choir in. You've got to transport them, you know, you've got to give the benefit of the doubt. It took many months to generate this, to host them in, but in the end, we even had the opportunity to travel with them last year and perform the piece at the Holland Festival. And that also was, was an astonishing experience. So yeah, I think that opportunity to take risks, that where the artist doesn't suffer the financial or logistical falling out should the piece not work, is a massive momentum giver.
If it can't happen anyway, it will happen at the center.
Mm.
That's the motto that we go by, that whatever that cannot be taken anywhere else will happen at the center. And normally that gives, that idea, that philosophy also gives people room to understand that, the way in which we embrace failure. And I understood your question. For us is that, whether something has happened, has failed, it's a success. Whether it has become a successful thing, it's also a success, because for us, it's always learning, is that, why does this idea collapse on us? It's a moment of learning. Therefore, it is also successful in its own way. So we never have really, total failures in our process of working.
Yeah.
Hilda and Yogi has one question, I guess.
Hi, Hilda.
Yeah.
No, it's him actually.
Actually, it's me who asked the question. So,
okay.
So I love this.
Yeah.
I'm trying to bring these ideas, as you know, to science as well. It's these less good ideas and the ability to fail and all that. So what you're doing, ANIMATEURING, I have a question about your role a little bit. It's a form of facilitation, I guess. You can say yes or no afterwards. That's okay. But do you have a technique? Is something crystallizing that you can teach to someone else, or is it so context dependent that you just have to? I mean, you're artist to react to the moment. Is it something that is that the only thing you can say, that it's just the context, or is it something that you think you could teach, for example?
Yeah, I mean, that's a very good question. I think it is largely context specific, but we have created and started to identify strategies of pushing ourselves and the artists out of habits when we enter the space, and certainly out of kind of assumptions of what defines a particular discipline. So, I mean, it is interesting to see what it is to bring kind of a text by Beckett to a group of performers, but who also people who identify as visual artists and that sort of thing, because it's deeply unstabilizing. And that is one of our strategies. I think the kind of continual push into a not known, an unstable, an ill-defined, those things are very uncomfortable. And occasionally we get pushback from artists, for sure, you know, and it's not everybody's cup of tea. But there's something about the energy in the room that kind of also has people taking deep breaths and going, okay, well, I don't understand this, and this is actually very difficult, but I'm just going to stick around for it and see what might still come. And I think that one of the things that as the animateur is that you kind of, you hold people through that, and you sort of literally rub their backs going, yeah, no, I know this sucks. This really sucks. We don't know what this is. This piece is horrible and it's continuing to be horrible. Or the alternative, you know, somebody feels like they've hit on something brilliant and they're kind of sticking to it and demanding that it gets into the space and gets seen, and everybody else is sort of giving each other side eyes and going, oh my God, is this really, do they really want to pursue this? But it's, I think, so, you know, there are these strategies that we've started to identify, and some of them are very obvious. They're kind of like different sorts of icebreakers and warm-uppers and theatre sports that you always get into. There's a lot of getting into one's body that we get involved with, which dancers and theatre practitioners are very comfortable with, but filmmakers and visual artists and sound artists look at you like you've gone completely crazy, and it's to make those people uncomfortable, and then similarly give a period for people to do sort of, you know, short 7-minute presentations on their trajectory, and there the visual artists are in their element, and the performers and the theatre makers don't want to be doing that. And I think that those things are important. One of the things that I think Pala is so excellent at, and a feature that he's brought in, is he's a timekeeper and a stopwatcher. And in our workshops, when we're ideating and when ideas have come out of a kind of free writing session, for example, he literally has a stopwatch and he lets people talk for 30 seconds. But when they start going beyond that, he stops them and moves on to the next person. And you know, he'll let it kind of facilitates a speed of thinking and showing it feels brutal at first, but by the end of the day, people get used to it, and it's enormously generative and democratic, actually, especially when you've got kind of 40, 50 people in the room. So that's been one of our other strategies in those first days of ideating new possibilities.
I mean, to add on what Bron is saying is that the thing is also, the main strategy is not to be afraid of the cacophony, not to be afraid of the senselessness. You know, it's one thing to make people comfortable, you know, to understand that whatever that they do, even when it does not make sense at the beginning, you know, it is enough, you know, to hold, and it's going somewhere. That for me is the very first strategy of building, of hosting and holding a room in that kind of a way. And then also is to understand, you know, how to bring participation, how to bring the energy. And that's where the animateuring comes in. That's where the curatorship comes in, is that energy and understanding whether this energy is energy that works for the room or energy that divides the room, you know, or is energy that says we are tired, we're seeing nowhere going, you know, is quite also an important aspect. Is that you need to be facilitating and not overbearing. You need to be democratic, but not overly, you know, loose. You know, so those kind of things are the things that you learn when you hold, you know, that space. And I think the best trajectory for me is that, and it's something that has happened in the animateuring as, you know, we reflect on it. When Bronwyn began, you know, animateuring, she was in season 1 and also consequently season 2, she was holding most of the curating in terms of, you know, she was an outside curator and helping, you know, settle the curators of the first season and going to the second season like that. And that kind of, you know, wearing a curatorial an animateuring hat becomes, you know, the crucial thing that also helps you filter what the field of animateuring is about, you know, because you are an energy, you know, person. At the same time, you are an administrative head. At the same time, you are an, you know, a hawk hovering over the material, looking at programming, looking at so many other things, and also thinking about how this thing needs to look like in 4 weeks' time, in 5 months' time. Just this morning, we had, you know, a kind of a meeting between myself and the artistic advisor Nhlanhla Mahlangu and Bronwyn, and thinking about how October is going to look like, you know, next year. So it's all those kind of things to start thinking about already, trying to go ahead without having to tell yourself this what the answers are. So there is a methodology. And the other thing that we are doing is that we are looking back into the years that we have been and really beginning to define what this methodology is about. And we will be, you know, publishing what some of the experiences, some of the, you know, so expect, you know, it's a project that, you know, Bronwyn is leading, which, you know, a number of people will contribute to. A publication on the Less Good Idea methodology will be one of those elements that we will share as well.
I would like to add something to that. What I've been following and hearing now today, and also what you're describing. When you're saying we are trying to publicize these at the moment, the first question immediately came to my mind is related with the fact that I think everybody experienced this in a very different way. The way the artists, the way the choreographers, the way Bronwyn as the animateur, or the way I mean, the way the audience is experiencing, it's totally different experiences. And what is really very interesting for me is how they are mixing together. But then I'm also questioning if the experience is mixing together, is the perception is also being mixed together or not? And I hope not, then this tension is even nicer. But it was an amazing night. I really liked it. I even, I must say that this hacking was also a very nice experience.
It was my first.
Johan had to leave, and before he was leaving, he said it was a less good idea, but it was okay. So the hacking. So, yeah. I'm very excited that we will be collaborating with the Octopus program with you starting from March. And I have a lot of expectations, and I hope the vaccine will be on the way so that we can start traveling again. Okay. Thank you so much, Bronwyn.
Thank you, Bashak and the Octopus program, and Angavanta. Thank you very much for putting this together, and I look forward to having Austrian artists finding South African artists in the future, and the kind of development of the SO Academy.
Thank you.
Cool.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Guys, thanks. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye-bye. Bye-bye.